looks like a Porsche 911. It has 6 horizontally opposed cylinders, where you'd expect to find them in a Porsche 911. But this is not a Porsche 911. Welcome to the slightly mysterious world of Ruf. Ruf. How'd you say it again?
Roof. Yeah, like the fiddler on the roof.
Thank you. Got it.
If this film yellows your bird, then do please think about joining the Hagerty Drivers Club. You get an award-winning magazine and myriad other benefits. To find out more, just click on the link below. Later on in this film, we've got a wonderful interview with Alois Ruf, all about the origin story of the company.
And that Porsche 356 driver lost control.
That Nurburgring film.
We did the first lap, and I say to the cameraman, so did you get some good footage? How did it go? Well, actually, hardly any. I said, well, why? I lost my shoe.
And Gran Turismo.
Which was one of the best deals ever.
But I think we should start with the car. Based in Pfaffenhausen near Stuttgart in Germany, Ruf began modifying Porsche 911s long before the word restomod was a twinkle in the headlamp of any Californian 964. But while it still restores and modifies older 911s, its 2 latest rear-engine models, we'll leave the mid-engine supercar for another day, have taken things a lot further. The CTR is turbocharged and the SCR that we're going to drive today is naturally aspirated. But both are based on the same unique platform.
This is obviously mid-build. This is a CTR, which you can tell by the intakes on the rear haunches there, so turbocharged. But fundamentally underneath, it's the same principle. So we've got sort of 3 parts to it. We've got the central carbon fibre tub, the heart of the chassis as it were. Then you've got the subframes each end, and then there's the roll cage in here, which has always been a big thing with Ruf. I remember the first ones I drove and seeing those integrated roll cage, beautifully integrated and then trimmed, but they're such an integral part of the car in terms of adding the stiffness to it. And then we have the bodywork. Made of carbon fibre, they call this the hat, or Hut in German. And because it adds nothing structurally, it can be incredibly light, just 15 kilos. Even my skinny arms can lift it.
Attached to that amazing carbon fibre tub, which adds 70mm to the wheelbase, is pushrod double wishbone suspension with KW springs and dampers mounted inboard. At each corner are carbon ceramic brakes and Ruf's own design of wheels, for which it has become rather famous. The end look is still very 964 Porsche 911 until you look more closely.
I thought it would be fascinating to get these 2 cars together because this is Ruf's RCT, so this is their restomod. It's worth saying actually what the letters stand for. The R is always for Ruf, C is sometimes for Carrera, as in this, Sport Carrera Ruf. Sometimes it's for Group C, as in CTR, and the T is always for Turbo. Anyway, I digress. This being a restomod, it's slightly modified, thoroughly restored, but essentially this is a 964. When you compare it to this, well, you really notice the difference in terms of the wheelbase, because overall they are the same length, but when you look at it here, you notice the extra 20mm added to the front, which you notice particularly in the door line there, and then 50mm at the rear. It's so fun seeing them side by side. This is Connaught green, this is Irish green for all you PTS fans. If you saw this on its own, you'd think, oh, it's a 964, not much has changed really, just slightly smoothed out, polished if you like. Seeing them together though, you really notice the difference in the overhangs.
But how do those changes manifest themselves once you're behind the wheel? Time to head out onto the rather lovely local Bavarian roads.
From the moment I got into this, it was fairly obvious this wasn't what I expected actually. You hear carbon fibre tub, inboard suspension, naturally aspirated engine revving to 9,000 RPM. And you think this is going to be some sort of 911 prototype race car. But it's just not. It's sort of encapsulated in this gear shift actually, which as soon as you put it in first, you feel the sort of short throw, but it's not rifle bolt. There's a little bit of sort of, I don't know, more softness in there. It's not imprecise. It's just sort of easy to use. There's no massive heft to it.
The steering too is much lighter than I expected. It's precise and smooth, but it's not wriggling with feedback. To that extent, it reflects the calm feeling from the chassis.
It feels so relaxed into its suspension, well supported, but you can feel those huge KW springs working away. They seem to be able to really breathe with the road with this suspension. Even when you put the dampers into their firmer setting, it still rides well. It just carves through corners. Yes, you can still ultimately feel that obviously the engine's at the rear, so it feels like a 911. But there's a smoothness, a sophistication to the way it goes around corners that's really interesting. It just feels like a really sophisticated car. It's a very grown-up car, very refined. Sorry.
The same goes for the engine, which, at Ruf, gets a good workout even before it goes in the car.
My favourite part of the whole factory has to be the engine rooms, because every engine that goes out to a customer goes out fully run in. Next door, there's one for the water-cooled engines, but this is my favourite because this sort of time capsule is where they run in the air-cooled engines. And this is an original dyno from 1973. There's just such a cool atmosphere in here somehow. It's well worn yet immaculate. And there's this incredible lack of sound from all these bricks. It's like the morning after a heavy snowfall. And as I walk out here, you can hear how the sound changes out in the corridor. And this is where they drive the engine that's in there. And you really do have to drive it. Hence, you've got all these dials on here, just as you'd find in the car.
The figures that Ruf is looking for on the SCR are 503 brake horsepower at 8,270 RPM and 347 pounds-feet of torque at 5,760 RPM. With only 1,250 kilos to push around, that's enough for 0-60 in 3.4 seconds and a top speed of 199 miles an hour.
I've always associated Rufs with turbocharging, really, I suppose, because of the Yellowbird and everything that's come after that, really. But this obviously isn't turbocharged, this is naturally aspirated, and it's based on the Metzger. So the same engine you find in a 996, 997 GT3. Its displacement is 4 litres, but it's got a slightly larger bore and a slightly shorter stroke than the Metzger that you'd find in a 997 GT3 RS 4 litre. Even the engine is just a little bit calmer than I might have expected because of the length of the gearing. It sort of encourages you to enjoy each gear. The sound is obviously 911. It's very GT3, but there's something just slightly different with that carbon airbox. There's a little bit of sort of almost M3 CSL. And actually, it sounds even better if you put the windows down. Then you get all the benefits of those intakes there.
The whole vibe of the car is a real mix of 997, 964 and then, well, some other cars entirely, even ones that don't have 9 in their name.
Even just sitting in this feels a little bit different because although it obviously feels like an older generation 911 and all the glass in here is closer than you'd expect in a modern car, nonetheless there's something a bit different. It takes a while to work out, but then you realise that these A-pillars aren't as thin as they should be because of the integrated roll cage. It adds a sort of feeling of sturdiness that you wouldn't expect perhaps.
It's a beautifully trimmed interior, and on a sunny day like this, the smell of the warm materials reeks of quality. Sadly, there are no back seats because of the suspension lying across the width of the car, but otherwise, the SCR feels really usable too.
You could drive it happily every day, and yet when you wanted, you you've got that to enjoy.
It's a package that could really be someone's one and done, if they've got around £800,000 to spend, of course. The car that sort of does it all. Classic looks, great sound, but also very usable. I'd perhaps expected some more classic feedback and feel through the controls, but it's obviously not what was intended, because the smooth character that runs through it is so clear. There was undoubtedly a vision for how this should drive, and I suspect it came from this man, Alois Ruf. Today there are 70 people working in the company, but Alois remains very much at its head. He was born in 1950 in the house behind the garage and grew up watching his father, also called Alois, work on cars and drive a tour bus at the weekends. Which was how one day the love affair with Porsches began.
My father drove his tour bus on a November day and was being overtaken by a Porsche 356. And that Porsche 356 driver lost control after he took over. He was making too many movements in his steering. The car started to make an alligator figure and ended up in the ditches and rolled the car. My father stopped, looked after the driver, and he took him to the hospital to make sure, but he had only cuts from the glass. But he was, of course, very nervous, and so my father said, "Don't worry, I have a workshop at home in the garage, and we will bring the car there, and when you are calmed down, we talk. I will ring you." And so he did that 2 days later, and he ended up buying the damaged car. And that was our entry to the world of Porsche.
To be precise, it was a 356 Carmen hardtop or notchback, and about a year later a young man stopped them in the street and asked to buy it. There and then, for an astonishingly good price. So being sensible, they sold it.
And my dad said, "I've never sold a car like that. What's going on with these people? They must be crazy." And they are, and they still are, and so are we. And this is why it matches so beautiful.
His father died in 1974, leaving Alois, aged just 24, to take over the company. And this is when the connection with Porsches really ramped up. It began with a tuned 930 turbo, then the first naturally aspirated SCR. But it was a decade later, in 1987, with the first CTR, that things went from Little League to Major League. Based on the lighter, narrower Carrera, but with huge turbocharged power, you probably know the CTR as the Yellowbird. It got the nickname after winning Road and Track's World's Fastest Cars test, where, apart from the red Italians, the other entrants were all very muted hues, and Ruf's canary-coloured CTR stood out. But the Yellowbird really flew to fame with a certain film, Fascination on the Nurburgring.
We wanted to make for the company an image movie. And the idea was make an image movie that is not too boring, with this stupid music in the background that sounds terrible, you know. And all these image movies were no longer watched by people because they were too boring. So he said, we should bring some dynamic in it. So let's go to the Nurburgring and make some good shots, sideways shots, and we put them into the image film. Good, great, let's do it. Then we hired a helicopter to make the aerial views and so on. And we got 6 sets of tires from Dunlop. They declared them as quality B, so they could give them to us. Because, as you know, the movie is very tire consuming, you know. So what happened is we were there, and then my friend Stefan, in his dry way, he says, well, maybe there are a few guys in the world who would appreciate to see the whole Nordschleife. Weather was great, we still had tires. I said, well, we have so much expenses anyway, so might as well do a whole lap. And I gave him the go-ahead. And so we did a full lap. We had the helicopter go a couple of laps, and he was a great pilot. He flew the helicopter basically like Stefan drove, everything in sideways, you know. That was very, very good. And so then the cameraman was, there's another funny story during the making of the movie. The cameraman was sitting there on the sill of the helicopter, strapped so he wouldn't fall out. Big camera. This was 35 millimeters. This was not video. And he did the first lap, and I say to the cameraman, so did you get some good footage? How did it go? Well, actually, hardly any. I said, well, why? I lost my shoe. Sitting on the helicopter, he lost his shoe, and he was so disoriented after losing his shoe that he didn't shoot, you know. So, well, then we did another lap in the helicopter, and then we did all the shots with the at that time, lipstick camera under the car. Then we had a complete door for the car built where the camera gear could be bolted on. So we had an extra door for the car. So we would make all the shots from the side, from the car to the wheel and so on. It was very, very well done, being relatively amateur, you know, but it worked out good, and I think it was well edited. And so you could see and learn about the full Nurburgring the first time. Every turn was documented there, and later I learned from people, they were on their workout equipment, working every day and had on the screen, learning about the Nordschleife, you know.
That footage brought Ruf into the consciousness of car enthusiasts worldwide, but the name and the car would become even more famous thanks to the Sony Playstation and Gran Turismo.
There's Mr. Kazunori Yamauchi, maybe you know him from the name. He was at that time, he didn't have a driver license, he didn't know how to drive a car, but he was the inventor of the video game. And he put it all together, all the IT to make that happen. And he made as a condition to the Sony Corporation, he said, I want the Ruf Yellowbird in there. And the Sony people, they flew to Germany, came to Pfaffenhausen, negotiated with us, and we came to a deal, which was one of the best deals ever, because it was such a publicity. Today when I travel to America and the customs officer who looks at my passport, he said, are you the guy with the Yellowbird? You know? So this is how much and well known this car is, and the brand. It's amazing. We only built 29 cars, but 80 million are in the video games.
Finally, I wanted to find out how Porsche feels about Ruf after all these years.
There are no statements, but I hear just it's a good-looking car, it's fine, and it's another car that complements the brand. And this is the most important thing for me. And when I hear that from the family members and from some executives, I think it's the best you can hear.
And that, I think, sums up so much about Ruf. A family company linked inextricably with the might of Porsche, yet not in its shadow. A manufacturer in its own right, a brand with its own incredible mythology, a company that, like the cars it produces, punches well above its weight. Oh, and one more thing. If you'd like to see what the latest 700 brake horsepower Ruf CTR is like, make sure you're subscribed to the channel.